One. Welcome back, Beans Army, to another episode of the Less is More Sports Podcast, the college offseason podcast, where you could say we're less of the regular season, but more of the offseason. As usual during the show, I usually dominate the intro, but this episode is going to be dominated by a topic that Matt has been following oh so closely this offseason. It is wild. It's crazy. It's got all the juicy details you want. But before we get into the main segment of the show, I do want to say that four things are for certain. Number one, Jon Scheyer is the GOAT recruiter. Like, since our last show, he's added Cooper Flagg and Patrick Gongba to the Blue Devils recruiting class of 2024. Also, since then, minus Isaiah Evans, all of that class has signed their letter of intent. Oh, and to top it off, the Boozer twins were on campus this weekend. Yeah, Jon Scheyer is the recruiting GOAT. He's him. That's all I got to say about that. Number two, and this is coming from a Texas fan, as you can see with the hat, and if you follow the show, you know I'm a Texas fan. You can't please Texas fans. However, to be fair, it's annoying as hell to watch a team whose motto is all gas, no brakes, but continuously let off the gas with a 20-point lead. I think that kind of speaks for itself. Number three, there's always controversy in the victory bell. If you know, you know. And last but not least, number four, John Calipari is soft. Matt, did you see that? Before their exhibition game against Kentucky State, asking them to not run zone because they hadn't had time to practice that? I'd be like, well, I'm sorry. That doesn't seem like my problem. And honestly, if I'm Kentucky State's head coach, I'm running zone for 40 minutes. I mean, I didn't even get a chance to watch the game, but I hope that's what they did. Like, how are you going to be an opposing coach and come at me and be like, hey, don't run this set. We haven't had time to work on that. Like, that's a you problem, buddy. That's not me. I have my team prepared. You should do the same. You're getting paid $8 million a year, and I can't imagine Kentucky State's head coach is making that kind of money. Is John Calipari making $8 million a year?
Probably.
I mean, yeah, it's something like that. I don't know. I mean, please correct me in the comment section below if that's not quite the right answer. But he's making a lot of money. I would expect him to have his teams prepared for games and not be reaching out to the opposing coach to say, hey, don't run that. We haven't worked on that yet. I don't know. That is probably the softest thing I've ever seen. I had to throw that in there.
I don't blame John Calipari there that last because we know what happens with two teams in Kentucky when they play Division II teams in scrimmages. You know that.
I feel like that's only a Louisville thing.
I don't know. It could spread. You never know. We'll talk about that later, though. We have some time. We have time to talk.
We have time to talk. And like I said, I dominated the intro, but it is officially Matt's time to shine because Matt is going to go into this wild and crazy offseason that was West Virginia basketball. Matt, take it away, my friend.
So Les asked me to do this. And at first I was like, I pretty much remember everything that happened. So, I mean, it's not going to be too bad. And then I ended up putting more work into this than any of our drafts, any of our cap or no cap episodes combined, because I had to make a freaking timeline to keep track of everything that freaking happened. And I still feel like I'm missing stuff because there's like so much happening here that it really does feel like the ESPN's, we tease the NFL about having a script all the time. And then like all the commercials have Keegan-Michael Key and the guys, and they're like, well, I'm going to be Kirk Ice. You couldn't script anything like this. This is the most convoluted mess I think I've seen in like the history of the NCAA basketball. So we're going to start at the very, very beginning, which is on the 5/8/23 this year. Bob Huggins goes on Bill Cunningham's show on WLW. I grew up listening to that as a kid. I don't know about you. That could be just a Ohio Valley thing.
I do want to add that Matt is younger than me. I feel like that was a very appropriate time to reiterate that point.
What? You're just jealous because I got Riz. Okay, moving on. Moving on. So he's on the Bill Cunningham show where they ask him a question about Xavier fans. And, of course, instead of, Bob Huggins, former coach of Cincinnati, we call him the Huggy Bear lovingly. But the man is anything but like an embraceable figure. Let's just be honest. He's a great coach. Not exactly a dude you want to go out and have a coffee with and chat about life. And of course, being Bob Huggins, he says something that I will not repeat on this show because we do not condone that kind of behavior about Xavier fans, but we will say it was a homophobic slur that is deemed highly unacceptable because of the way our culture has moved on since like I don't know, probably the 1990s is when he was there. And so that's strike number one. There's a lot of controversy about that. People are already calling for a suspension, or in some more severe cases, calling for his jobs. And in the meantime, West Virginia has a player, Josiah Davis, enter the transfer portal a few days later. Then, because this is 2023 and she's infiltrated all sports and there's nothing we can do to stop her, Taylor Swift intervenes in the story in the strangest way imaginable by having a concert in Pittsburgh that directs traffic and redirects traffic and increases the police presence so much that the Pittsburgh officers on June 16th noticed that there's a car driving erratically and speeding down the road, down the highways of Pittsburgh. And who else would be behind that wheel but West Virginia head coach, already in dire straits after what's occurred on WLW, Mr. Bob Huggins. He fails a sobriety test, and for many of the people of West Virginia, which is already, there's a whole other part of West Virginia this year where they're mercilessly gutting their like arts and letters programs and some of their science programs and foreign language. That's also disgusting. But that's not what we're here to talk about. I just want to shout that out because I read about it, and man, do I feel awful for this university after this year, even though Neil Brown's turned it around. But still, he fails a sobriety test on June 16th.
Neil Brown was on my hot seat, by the way, at the beginning of the year in our cap or no cap.
I think it's. I'll get to that a little bit later too.
No. I just wanted to point that out. That has nothing to do with what we're talking about at all. I just want to point that out.
I know. So the next day, the 17th, West Virginia gives their big announcement like, oh yeah, we are going to go ahead and force him. He's going to resign. And we know, I being an Indiana fan, know what this basically looks like. This is a coach who's a little bit outdated, who's overstayed their welcome and finally broken the camel's back. So this resignation is tendered. And so what that means is now you can open up the players on the roster because of an NCAA ruling, have 30 days now to enter the transfer portal and explore their options. So we hear over the next few days about, we've got guys like Trey Mitchell's in the transfer portal now. Kirk Kiersa, one of the big gets they got in the transfer portal, is in the transfer portal. Joe Toussaint enters the transfer portal. Those all happen on 6/23, 6/22. Then finally on June 24th, people in-house finally hire Josh Eilert to be the head coach, the interim head coach. And so that at least alleviates the fans a little bit because the next day, Kirk Kiersa announces he's staying on June 25th. And it's like, okay, that's fine. But then James Okonkwo enters the transfer portal the very next day. Joe Toussaint, he's gone. He's gone to Texas Tech. That happens on July 4th. Happy birthday, America. Not so happy a birthday for the state of West Virginia. 7 on the next day, July 5th, Jose Perez. Yes.
Huh? I didn't say anything.
I thought you were saying something. My bad.
I was laughing. Perez. I was laughing at your pun. Every now and again, you make a funny pun.
I try to sprinkle them in. I just don't know if I need to keep going or let you laugh. We don't have a laugh track.
You just keep going, bud.
But anyway, July 5th, Jose Perez, who's a stalwart defensive guard, enters a transfer portal. James Okonkwo is gone by 7/6. He's going to North Carolina, which is part of like a weird super team they're building up. And then July 8th comes along. And Bob Huggins comes out from his hiding hole and announces, I didn't resign, through his legal representative, Dan Campbell, who works in Cincinnati, Ohio. He wants to correct. He thinks he's had a breach of employment at West Virginia after all of the shenanigans he's been through this offseason, and insists that he is the rightful head coach of the West Virginia Mountaineers, not Eilert, not whoever the shadow council he's accusing put him in power. So we've officially gone from just basketballness to freaking Game of Thrones and The Godfather here. Someone's going to get whacked and fed to the Mothman if they're not careful. It's that crazy out there.
And if forgive me if I'm jumping the gun on that, if I'm getting ahead of myself with your timeline here, but like, doesn't Bob Huggins' daughter get involved too?
At some point, yes, but we'll get. She's part of
Okay.
this. She's part of this. They're all trying to get their head in the game because the daughter, his daughter, pushed at first for them to like hire in house, and then now she's on the side of the lawyer is telling me this, that, and the other thing that he did not resign and he's the rightful coach, and so you think with all this mess that like there is nothing happening right here that's good for the West Virginia Mountaineers, like at all. It's over. It's sad. And then out of nowhere, they get a transfer from Florida State and Jeremiah Bembry. And then out of nowhere, they get St. John's, another guy who's basically been cast off by Rick Pitino, Quinn Saslinski, to come in. That happens on July 9th and July 20th, respectively. Then we get to July 21st. Jose Perez is back, baby. And it's like, did this team just get good? What the hell's going on here? But then, that on the it happens to occur that Trey Mitchell does transfer to Kentucky. And you're like, okay, They land a commitment from offering Naven on July 28th. And then by August 10th, they had another transfer from Manhattan named Omar Silviero. And he was applying for an extra year of college, and the NCAA denies that. So let's put that in the back of our head for right now. That'll be a fun fact we use later. Then out of nowhere, on August the 17th, they land Noah Farrakhan from Eastern Michigan. And it's just like, what's going on here? Okay, this team, they've got Jesse Edwards. They've got a lot of weird parts on them. Maybe they're good. And then at 9 on September 30th, Jose Perez is gone. They agree to part ways. There is a disagreement over classes, credits, study hall arguments, and he's out of the program. And very quickly on October the 10th, he's gone to Arizona State. But you look at what's happening on the roster. Sure, they've got an interim head coach who may or may not be the rightful head coach in the eyes of some people, but they've still got a hell of a roster with Saslinski, with Jeremiah Bembry, with Jesse Edwards, with Kirk Kiersa. It can't be that bad, right? Nothing weird is going to happen. Oh, and I forgot to mention, they have this really good guy from Montana State named Raekwon Battle who's going to help run the show and score a lot of points. And the NCAA on October 23rd denies his waiver.
Ooh.
It's a big battle there. In fact, this one is so crazy that both the governor of West Virginia, Mr. Jim Justice, and Senator Joe Manchin of the United States Congress are both sending letters to the NCAA demanding they list out their logic and reason for denying Raekwon Battle his waiver. And this is still going on today. He transferred from Washington to Montana State. He didn't graduate from Montana State, but there was some weird shenanigans going on there. But because he's still a two-time transfer, the NCAA is like, nah, we sticking to the rules in this case. Denied. And Jim Justice is like in the era, and Jim Justice and Joe Manchin in the era of the NIL are like, what are we doing, folks? We can't be doing this to these kids. You can't tell these kids they can make money and all that. So it's a blow. It's a blow. But you're like, okay, well, it can't get any worse. And then things actually do get very real world dire. There's nothing to joke about here. On October the 27th, West Virginia playing a charity exhibition against George Mason. Georgetown transfer, very tough player, Akaka Cock, collapses on the floor. It's a very I did see the video. I happened to be watching that night, and it was just all the air left. Not only I think that arena, but left anybody watching it.
Yeah.
And it's just horrible. They're working with it for 10 to 15 minutes. Images of DeMar Hamlin flash in your head. Images of Hank Gathers flash in your head. And you're just
Keontae Johnson had a similar situation when he was at Florida. Yeah, it was awful.
Praying,
scary stuff right there.
That whatever, as you watch that kid get on a stretcher, and you're just praying that they're okay, that their brain is functioning, that their body is still, that they're still with us. And so they take him to the Ruby Memorial Hospital. He's okay. He made it out he's made it to further testing. He's not going to play for a while. But, that's okay. But that's just another thing that's like, oh my gosh, that's just horrific. And then finally, as the season begins to approach, you're thinking, well, Akaka Cock's not going to play. Raekwon Battle's not going to play. But you still got, Jesse Edwards and Kirk Kiersa. And then on Halloween, trick or treat, everybody. Guess what? You're getting a 9-game suspension. Isn't that fun for impermissible benefits while at the University of Arizona? So Kirk Kiersa is suspended for 9 games. They've lost both probably starting point guards. They were both guys who were going to bring the ball to the floor, both starting point guards. And it's like, what can you do in this day and age
Well,
to
for
get an
me, for
impermissible?
something for me to do, this is actually where I chime in on this one, because I wanted to talk about Kirk Kiersa for a second.
Yeah,
And serious question: is it fair to assume that Kirk Kiersa's improper benefits were nothing good at all? Doesn't mean keep before you answer that. Just hear me out. Given the state of college athletics, you can literally give players money, cars, and whatnot. I mean, hell, Bijan Robinson got his own mustard. I mean, what? So obviously, like whatever he got, like has to be bad enough to where you still get suspended. Like, I mean, I don't want to like jump to conclusions and say like it was this or that, or being a Louisville native, you don't want to like say,
yeah,
oh, he was getting that for play, BS. I don't want to go into that. I don't want to assume that. But I mean, we're in the NIL era. You can pay players. You can give them stuff. I mean, you can just attach it to their NIL. I mean, it looks like it's all a legal thing. So it really begs the question of what was he actually getting?
I thought
And
that
we
at
even
first
want to
too,
know.
but then I remembered, Les, that we're dealing with the NCAA, who suspended a John Harbaugh, well, now twice, but the first time over a cheeseburger. So it's kind of like the NCAA at the end of the day is still the NCAA. Where it's like, even if they could say that like the limit on your NIL was $1,000 and you gave them $1,000 and 1 cent, and that 1 cent needs to be made an example of. So
The good old you can supply the bagel, but you can't supply cream cheese rule.
exactly. So it's like, are we dealing with something more sinister, or is this just you put cheese on your hamburger, you incorrigible little twat? Here's a 9-game suspension. Get over it.
I
And
would think
as
though,
we find out more.
9 games, I would think it would have to be pretty serious.
Yeah, that's what I'm thinking too, because even for that cheeseburger, it was 4 games. So I'm not thinking we're thinking about a U of L thing here, but I don't think we're
Mm-hmm.
talking about a cheeseburger either. I think the answer is probably somewhere in between. And you know that the NCAA, after what happened with Sean Miller, was
Mm-hmm.
probably watching Arizona with the voyeurism of Hal in 2001: A Space
Oh, they
Odyssey.
had
Like,
them under a microscope. There's no
yeah.
no question about that.
So, the minute there was like a possible F up in like anything that was going on, it was, I'm afraid I can't let you do that, Tommy. And they're just making sure that everybody is staying honest with themselves, because they got off easy the last time, but the NCAA very rarely misses twice like that. So that's what I'm thinking. I'm thinking, yeah, it's probably not something that we're going to all recoil in terror at, but I'm thinking it's a little bit bigger than a cheeseburger.
And this begs my next question. And I'm usually not the type of person who's like, "Oh yeah, well what about them?" type of dude.
Yeah.
But here I am going to ask a question like, "Oh yeah, what about them?" So my question for you is, what makes West Virginia's offseason crazier than a team like Memphis? Because if you remember, of course, you have the Mikey Williams and the Jaquan Walton gun charges. You
Yeah.
have a roster pretty much assembled last minute, really. You have the DeAndre Williams eligibility request and dealing with the will he play, will he not play, and ultimately was denied eligibility by the NCAA. So my ultimate question to you is like, what separates West Virginia from a team like Memphis as far as having like a crazier offseason? Or really, is there anything? Just West Virginia was just more intriguing to you.
Well, here's the thing I was thinking about when this happened is, West, when you, at the end of the day, those kids, regardless, committed to play for Penny Hardaway.
Mm-hmm.
And Penny Hardaway is still on those sidelines. And Bob Huggins, who those kids committed to play for, is not. You're playing for Josh Eilert now.
Yeah.
And you move on down the line. Memphis still has Javon Quinterly and Jordan Brown. Mikey Williams is what, 23, 24?
No.
Oh,
Mike,
he's the one.
Mikey would have been a freshman this year.
Oh, not Mikey Williams. Oh, the other guy.
DeAndre
DeAndre
Williams.
Williams. That's
DeAndre
what I'm.
Williams. I'm about to
He's
say, come
always,
on, we're talking about Mikey Williams, that former like freshman phenom in high school basketball
I know it.
that like was
Sometimes,
on everywhere. The guy who would act like he was like straight
yes,
flubbing
that's
it, but
true.
like grew up in a bigger neighborhood than me. That guy.
Yeah, that's true. But there's a lot of names less. I'm sorry. But at the end of the day, you still got the big acquisitions you made at the last minute, unlike West Virginia. You still have a starting guard and a starting big man, and you've got the man who's led you to the NCAA tournament and like almost a few upsets the past couple years. And that's what. And in addition to the stuff that would happen to like poor Acock with his cardiovascular issue and things like that. It's just more like there's some stability there at least. West Virginia, you're just kind of wondering like what's going to happen next. And to top that all off, to segue into topic number 2 that I was going to, you
Mm-hmm.
look at the results of the season. Memphis blew out Missouri the other day,
Mm-hmm.
whereas I was not sure that West Virginia was going to overcome Missouri State. They're a very tough team. In fact, West Virginia did lose that same week to Monmouth. In addition to so many other upsets, we've had Princeton beating Rutgers. We've had uh, Western Carolina beating Notre Dame. We've had James Madison beating a top 4 team in the country. Chattanooga beating Louisville. We have Holy Cross beating Georgetown. And so that brings me to my second point that I want to ask you, Les, which is I'm going to ask you this question and I'm going to go on for a little bit, which was wasn't the NIL supposed to destroy college sports?
That's what the old head said, but it's sure as hell not looking like it.
The transfer portal and the NIL were supposed to kill college sports. But this, to me, as we watch the football season head to its conclusion and the basketball season start up, proves to me the big difference in NIL and the big philosophical difference between college football and every other NCAA sport, which is that you can have all the NIL money in the world if you're a basketball program. You can have all the transfers in the world if you're a basketball program. But if you can hoop, you can hoop. And that's the bottom line. I think that the NIL thing may kill. Well, we talk about the NIL killing anything. I thought it was a silly discussion because to me, college football has already been dead for decades. Because whether we want to admit it or not, when we say we're empowering the big guys have always been in power.
Yeah.
College football is always about the dynasties. Yes, we talk about Boise State, but Boise State didn't win the championship when they beat Oklahoma all those years ago. UCF, when they beat LSU all those years ago, didn't win the championship.
Hey,
Those are
whoa, whoa,
just
whoa! They hung a banner. They hung a
they
banner.
didn't. Well, we all know. Come on, we all know.
I had.
We all,
I had to. I had to.
Central Florida. I don't hate you for that. I understand why you hung the banner, but that really wasn't the national championship. That was a de facto national championship, if anything, for you. So,
Suck it, UCF.
oh my gosh. But my point being is that this is all college football has always been about the dynasties. So depth and circumstances on the whole do matter there. And yes, we're going to talk about firing coaches next week who didn't perform up to expectations. But still, on the whole, if you've got a deeper team, if you've got a stronger team in college football, you're going to win. We get like a crazy upset in the early regular season, like once every 3 years. And there's usually about one or two, if that, when we talk about college football. But when you talk about the NIL in places like college basketball and other sports like that, it's really not comparable because like I said, the bottom line is if you can hoop, you can beat anybody. Basketball is more of an equalizing sport in that regard.
Mm-hmm.
And if there's anything we've seen over the past couple years, it's that with NIL rising up to being equitable for some of these kind of big, not too big schools, is that you can pull it off. Arkansas State will be a name to watch next year in basketball because they have used their NIL and recruiting to get two top 100 guys in on their building. And every year the parity in college basketball keeps getting better. And the rich get richer. You say that. But look what happened. I'm going to use the women's team as an example. You and I were talking about Haley Van Lith, comes from Louisville to LSU. They're supposed to be like the greatest team of all time. They got
We were
knocked.
calling them the Justice League.
Yes. And they get knocked on their butt in their first game by Colorado, who granted is the 20th ranked team in the country. I will
No
see
slouch
that.
there either. No slouch there at all.
But still, people were acting like this team could go undefeated or was going to like set a new paradigm for women's basketball. And in their first game, they get beat. A team that Indiana almost got knocked off by Florida Gulf Coast. Florida Gulf Coast didn't have their best player. He's a transfer from Purdue. Their two of their leading scorers in that game were a transfer from that Princeton team that knocked off Arizona last year and a guy from Penn State. If you can ball, you can ball. And I don't get why college football sometimes is the one we've chosen to be the paradigm of sports. I know it's because of the money. When you have like that much money and that much culture and tradition in your building and all the seating capacity, that's why you chose that one to make the money. But still, it seems like comparing apples and oranges when it comes to NIL. The problem we're going to experience when it comes to college basketball is there are people who, for some reason, want to establish that dynastic approach to college basketball. And especially when you look at what they're doing with the NIT, where they're trying to eliminate the mid-major regular season conference champions and put in more mid-tier power conference schools. That's the mistake they're making. They're trying to equalize a sport that's already equal. So NIL isn't killing the sport. The belief that NIL is killing the sport is what's going to kill the sport. Is because you feel like you have to compete if you're a mid-tier ACC school in the NIT. The kids already aren't excited to be there. You're trying to add parity to a sport where you already have parity. Because the bottom line is if you can ball, you can ball. And if you can't, well, then you're just going to lose. And that's just how it is. And that's my big rant here. Is like when I watch this college basketball season, especially, and I know people are going to tell me like, well, you got to look at the situations. Those teams all have new coaches. Michigan State didn't.
No.
Michigan State returned a senior-laden team with new freshmen to fill out the positions where they were lacking, and still got knocked off by James Madison. I'm sorry. So
JMU.
JMU, the Dukes, who are also getting screwed by the NCAA in football by not being allowed to play in a bowl game. We'll talk about that later, probably. But the bottom line is, people who said NIL is going to kill college sports were right, but it's because they're applying it in the wrong ways. Because let me tell you something: in a sport like basketball, it doesn't matter, and in a sport like college football, it doesn't matter for a different reason. Because when we think about college basketball, we think about the upsets. We think about Fairleigh Dickinson. We think about UMBC. We think about the miracle runs in the tournament. When we think about college football, we think about the U, who went on that title run. Those early '90s Nebraska teams, Florida in the mid 2000s, Alabama in the early 2010s. It's all about the dynasties there. NIL doesn't change a hill of beans there. It just makes some teams a little bit stronger than others. But when you try to apply these weird laws about like parity to a place that already has about parity, you're going to get a diminished product. And that's the warning I want people to take away from this is that when you talk about college sports in that regard, you're only really talking about football, which is almost dead anyway. It's almost like the NFL. There are 32 teams that people will watch year in and year out. And then there's just everybody else. But when you try to apply those same principles to sports like college basketball, men's and women's, where if you can hoop, you can hoop, you're going to get a diminished product.
How often do we see this like throughout history? And this is going to be the most political that I ever get on this show. And even then, I mean, I'm not even going to be pointing fingers at either political party. But how often do you see a product ruined because people that are a part of a certain group think they are fighting a war that they're not actually fighting?
Yeah, it happens a
This
lot.
is, yeah, and this is like what this reminds me of with NIL. You're not fighting the battles with NIL that you think you are. If anything, you are justifying over 100 years of what should have been happening from day one. Because when you can build stadiums, you can use these players' image to make millions of dollars with your product placement or whatever BS, and that player cannot receive a dime of that. I've said it once, I've said it 100 times on this show. That is the real crime. You think it's a crime to pay a college athlete? No, the crime is to use that college athlete for you to make millions of dollars, and then that athlete in return still would technically get in trouble if they needed to borrow some gas money to go to the mall. That's the real freaking crime. And I mean, not to mention, again, like you said, it doesn't take away from parity. At the end of the way, like you said, if you can hoop, you can hoop. And the thing is, what baffles me about all of this is that NIL, if the one thing NIL has destroyed has been all the things that the old heads have been complaining about over the last decade. I mean, players are leaving too early. Oh, we got back-to-back years of the reigning player of the year coming back to college. Not enough parity. We had FAU and San Diego State in the Final Four last year. And not to mention everything that's happened so far this season.
Yep.
So it's just this is not even getting to be a fun conversation. This is just getting a, oh my gosh, I want to beat my head into the freaking wall conversation. Man, I'm sure you still feel the same way.
I do. And like I said,
we got Bean involved on this one.
Bean's always been a supporter of NIL. I know that. And just to wrap it up, I think, like I said, the biggest issue is people are taking the wrong lessons away from this and trying to make like bigger schools stand out more when they already stand out. They don't need that. What we need is for college basketball to embrace the product that it is, which is chaos and uncertainty. And I know there are some people who don't like that, but I think it's the more fun sport because of that. You don't know what's going to happen in a tournament like that. Every year, this year we talked in college football about, it's so wide open. Alabama doesn't look good. Alabama's 8-1 and 9-1 at this point, and they're threatening.
Who was their loss to?
I know.
Not the point. That too.
The point. But they're right there in the college football playoff conversation again. It just
Bean
feels
also interrupted to say that Washington's winning the national title. That's what Bean said. That's what Bean
is
said.
A dog, so he would support his fellow dogs. I get that. Bean
apparently he doesn't like Georgia. He never likes Georgia. Well, then again, we thought it was a Stetson Bennett thing, but apparently it's a Georgia thing.
Really? I just remember how much he hated Stetson Bennett, man.
I know, that was weird.
I still think he's responsible for like everything that went wrong in LA.
No, yes, Bean somehow had something to do with that.
Bean's got like a secret sleeper cell in LA that's like going to destroy Stetson Bennett. Look at that.
Bean's master plan is unfolding.
He can barely look in the camera because he knows he's guilty.
He knows it's true. He
knows what he did.
Mm-hmm. He had to go down after that.
He had to go back to the hiding hole and like admit that like the plan was compromised.
I'm actually not hiding. I just don't want to look at you two.
You're both ugly. I hate the way you both don't trim your beards.
Bud? You got a little body hair, bud. Ow. You got a little too much body hair to be making that comment, my boy.
I'm covered in fur. I'm an animal. It's different, you moron.
No, sounds the same to me, bud. Technically, humans are animals too, buddy.
Oh, now he's going. Now he wants the kisses. Okay, don't. The microphone is not an ice cream cone, Bean.
It is now.
It's bean flavored ice cream, the best kind.
It's bone flavored ice cream.
Oh no, I don't know about that one.
Oh Lord,
what are you doing? Oh! I'm mesmerized by the hand too. Okay. Oh!
Oh! Now he's gone.
He was close. He was close.
No, he's bringing me a toy now. You can't see him, but he's bringing me a toy now.
Excellent work, Bean. So to sum up our podcast for today, West Virginia, I just hope that you have a nice season because this is like one of the craziest stories I've ever heard. And NCAA, people who think NIL is killing college sports, don't be what you're trying. Don't have a self-fulfilling prophecy, please. Just let each product stand for what it stands for. And one day I'll talk to you about why, one day less, when we have nothing else to say, I will joyfully explain why I think that the college football would be better off breaking off and forming like its own separate NCAA entity rather than this revenue sharing. So we don't have to hear this hand washing anymore because we're pretty much already to that point anyway. So yeah, that's our podcast today. If it ain't broke, don't fix it, basically.
Absolutely. As always, like and subscribe to Less is More Sports YouTube and Spotify channel to get the latest updates on our episodes coming out. Follow our social media pages on Facebook, Twitter, and Threads at Less is More Sports to get the latest updates with each upcoming episode. And I'm going to end this podcast just by saying that the word on the street is Matt is going to offer me $75 million to officially leave my own show and become the Matt podcast or something like that. I don't know. Can't remember what he told me.
Your buyout's too high.
Yeah, we don't have that kind of money, but
I'm just gonna bring in Bobby Petrino to replace me. He's my interim.
I don't know if I want that, to be completely honest.
Well, it's not your choice, Les.
You're right, I'm bought out. You're right, I'm bought out. Silly me, sorry.
The negotiating tactics have worked. Congratulations, Matt.
It's no longer my show. We're done.
High five.
All right, but that's all the time we got for today. Thank you everyone who gave us a listen, and stay tuned for our crazy coaching fired episode coming as soon as possible.
Bye, everybody.